Hello. I have a mountain of meat. As you can see, we're gonna make a beautiful winter dish today. It's called Choucroute Garnie, which means the dressed sauerkraut. So, first things first, what we're gonna do is we're gonna put our salt pork that we have over here. We're gonna put our salt pork in simmering water because you want to get a bit of the salt out and you want to get a bit of the oil out. You want to get it tender a little bit. And we're gonna reuse this as salted pork water later. So salt pork in the water, and you let it, you just let it simmer and get tender and less salty over time. So what's next? Next is going to be cutting our onions. It's nothing crazy, we're just going to basically cut them a little bit thin and we're going to sweat them. So I got my onions. Everybody knows, you know how to cut onions. So, you can make them a little bit chunky if you want. Some people leave like a whole onion there and they put cloves in, but I'm just gonna cut them like this. I want like the sauerkraut to be pretty uniform, if that makes any sense. My home knife is getting a little bit dull, but it's okay because we're not doing anything crazy with it, so it doesn't need to be crazy sharp. I mean, this is a very home style dish, so you don't need to be too fussy about how you cut things. And it's gonna simmer for so long that the onions are gonna get tender, so any like really large chunk is not gonna be too bothersome, I think. So what is Choucroute Garnie? As far as I know, Choucroute Garnie is a French dish from the Alsace region of France, so they're close to Germany. So you're gonna find a lot of things that you would expect in German food, such as sauerkraut, sausages, and like a lot of the like salted pork products. And I believe there's also a German version of this dish, but I'm more familiar with the Alsace version of this dish. I'm not French or anything, but I know a thing or two about the French version of Choucroute Garnie, I suppose. The differences, I think, are mainly just in the choice of like sausages, the choice of meats, and the choice of aromatics. So for example, in France they'll put Juniper Berries and they'll put Cloves, but in Germany I think they put Caraway, for example, but I put all three. And I think the choice of wine is different. Like maybe in Germany they use beer instead of wine, and in France they use wine. I'm not too sure. I don't know like all the differences. Like I said, I don't know everything about every cuisine in the world. But this is my version, my take. It's getting cold outside, so it's a nice comforting dish to eat when it's cold, with all the salted pork and all the cured pork and all the pork and the fat and the onions and the wine and the sauerkraut. It's just very satisfying and wholesome to eat. This is not a light food by any means. This is borderline, I wouldn't even say this is not even a healthy food by any means. I mean, look at this mountain of pork, and look at this mountain of pork, and there's just and the salt pork. There's a lot of fatty pork. Today, as far as my porks go, what do I have? I have kielbasa that I just cut into chunks. I have a pork shoulder, skin off pork shoulder. I have pieces of ham. I have a bunch of sausages. I have French and German style sausages. I have smoked pork jowl, which is a pork cheek with the skin and the fat cap on. And I have my salt pork. Now, What I recommend when you make choucroute garnie is I recommend to have at least one smoked pork product. Let it be bacon, smoked pork ham hocks, smoked ham, things like that. One cured pork product, so ham, salt pork. You know, if you have any other like cured products, like you know, like a salted pork loin or things like that, you can use that too. And then I want some fresh pork products, so to speak, so sausages, pork loin, pork chops, things like that. And then having a mix of everything makes it like a really rounded flavor. And you might think it'll be too fatty or too meaty or too oily or too salty, but the sauerkraut's very sour, and we're gonna the onions are sweet, the sauerkraut's sour and funky. The wine we're gonna use is also gonna bring some acidity, so you'll see it's very balanced despite all the fat and all the meat you'll have in there. So for the next step, all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna cut my pork jowl a little bit, because I want to basically have my pork jowl incorporated in two different parts of the dish. I want pork jowl while it's simmering, that way pork jowl is simmering, that way the smokiness and the fattiness kind of spreads throughout, but also, and it'll become super tender, but I also want some pork jowl for later on in the process, that way the pork jowl will still have some body to it, because otherwise it becomes really soft, because as you can see, I mean, if you know guanciale or anything, but like as you can see, it's basically only fat. It's fattier than bacon, and I'm using this as like my bacon substitute, so to speak. And we're basically gonna make pork cheek lardons, I guess, if you want to see it that way. So we're gonna cut this into decently large and thick chunks. It smells delicious, it smells smoky, that's what you want. And I'm going to start these in a cold pan to let them render their fat. And I'm not going to use my entire pork jowl because it's quite a lot. So I'm probably going to keep this and maybe this for later. And this I'm going to freeze or keep on the side for other applications, because it's a really nice versatile ingredient. It's basically bacon on steroids, so you can kind of do anything you want with it. Now I'm going to go clean my hands because you can see they're quite oily. So we're just at our stove now, and all we're going to do is start the stove, and we're going to slowly render our pork fat. Well, pork, I say pork fat, but it's our smoked pork jowl. But I mean, as you can see, it's basically just fats. But that's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna render it slightly, let it come to temp, and you know, I started in a cold pan. That way, as it gradually heats up, the pan gets gradually hot, and our pork gets gradually hot, so it renders slowly instead of immediately starting to scorch and burn. If you want to be, you know, really safe about it, I know some people, what they do is they add a little bit of water in there, and then the water is going to get up to temperature. It's going to render some of the fat in the water, in the pork. Then as the water evaporates, you know, your pork's already going to have rendered a lot of fat, so it's going to start frying in its own fat. That's one way. That's what I do usually when I want to render fat out of like meat, to have cleaned animal fat. You know, I'm doing this way with the pork jowl, but traditionally they'll start their sauerkraut with, you know, they'll put like goose fat or duck fat or pork fat, and then they'll render they'll sweat their onions in it. But because I have all this pork jowl, I may as well use it. Or, you know, if you had bacon, you could start it with bacon too. And I mean, I have a lot of duck fat, so, you know, in the spirit of being French and their love of duck fat and goose fat, and fat in general. Not that this is not a not so fatty dish. I'll just add 1 spoon of duck fat for the authenticity, if you will. Just to keep it real, keep it French. It's gonna be a cold winter, I think. Summer was abnormally hot, so I have a feeling winter is gonna be abnormally cold to compensate for it. So, a little bit of extra fat won't hurt. Get some meat on them bones, get some insulation going. Plus, mixing fats is one of the wonders of French cuisine, Butter, pork fat, duck fat, goose fat, bacon fat, salt pork fat. All the fats mixed together, it makes for such a wonderful, complex depth of flavor, That's why I think, for example, another French dish I might do for the winter, which is a cassoulet. Cassoulet is so wonderful because cassoulet also has the, cassoulet also has the mixture of all the fats. So we're just gonna let this slowly render. Starting to smell absolutely, positively wonderful. I think putting that duck fat was the right call. The smell is just absolutely incredible. You got the smokiness from the smoked pork jowl. You got the porky goodness, the cured pork smell. You got the kind of pork sweetness. You got a lot of stuff going on already, and the dish has just started. And this is something I also want to mention. People always joke around, oh, white people don't season their food. White people don't season their food. Maybe in North America that's true, but I think in Europe, there's a different philosophy because, due to the weather, especially in the more northern parts of the world, due to the climate, you can't really grow many spices or things like that. So you have to make do with alternative methods of seasoning things. So one way you can think about it is, for example, in a lot of northern countries, they'll smoke meats and cure them, and you'll use those smoked elements as a seasoning for what you're gonna eat. So for example, over here we have pea soup, and pea soup is like a soup of dried peas, of dried split peas that you cook with ham and bacon. So the smokiness and the saltiness and all the flavors going on in the ham. And back then it was probably too, the ham or salt pork or whatever they use, they probably fermented a little bit too. So all those flavors that you had in the ham, the fermented flavors, the umami, the pork sweetness, the smokiness, the cured flavors and everything, those would flavor your soup, because otherwise you didn't have many spices. So that's one way you could, quote unquote, spice up your food with without spices. But plus there's just a bunch of other things, spices that you use in northern countries and in cold countries are not going to be the same. For example, we're going to use for example in this dish, I'm going to use this dish as an example. In this dish we use wine as a seasoning. We use caraway and juniper berries and black peppercorns, which are things that you can find in the north, and they have their own flavor. We use and then we use all the different meats as seasonings themselves. Those meats are packed with flavor, whether they're smoked, they're fermented, they're cured, they're dried, they're processed with garlic and onions and stuff like that. You don't need spices to have flavor of food. Now, don't get me wrong, I love spices and I love spicy things and I love aromatics and things like that, but in this case, I think this is a dish where I'm not even really going to brown my meat, apart from a little bit of rendering the fat off the pork jowl, I'm not going to brown anything, it's all going to boil and simmer. And usually when people think of boiled meats, and they're kind of disgusted. Boiled meat, it's so there's no flavor, there's where you don't get that brown goodness. But in my opinion, you don't need necessarily brown flavors. Sure, brown flavors are amazing and they're delicious and there's so much complexity and stuff going on. It's one of the reasons we love meat so much. But boiled meats can be very good too. And in this case, we'll have boiled sausages, boiled pork. I say boiled. Boiled makes it sound more disgusting than it is. You know, it's braised in a flavorful broth of sauerkraut, onions, wine, and aromatics. You know, it's gonna be delicious. How does it not sound delicious? And this makes me think of in my city, Montreal. There's a restaurant called Beba, and Beba every time it gets cold, they have their boiled meats dish that they do, and you know, it's something that people go crazy over. You know, and they have a lot of respect for it. They call it boiled meats to make it sound disgusting, but they not to make it sound disgusting, but to make it sound less glamorous than it actually is, because they want you to come in with low expectations, so that when you eat it, you know, you get your mind blown. You're like, oh my god, I can't believe, you know, boiled meats would taste so good. So I respect that a lot from Beba. They do a lot of like I guess you could say like more old school, you know, old world Europe food. So they try to showcase these things that maybe people forgot about, or that people take for granted, or that people don't respect enough. I like that a lot about them. So while this renders, we're going to move on to another step and do that kind of concurrently. I'm at like a medium high right now. There's so much water in here in the onions that I'm not too worried about them browning or them overcooking. You know, you can see all the steam coming out, and you can smell it too. So while I work on the other things, you know, I'm going to keep my nose open, I'm going to keep my eyes open, I'm going to keep my ears open to make sure that nothing burns. So I make my own sauerkraut, but I also bought some sauerkraut. This is you know, home style fermented sauerkraut. It's not pasteurized, so it's still fermenting. And when I bought it, the lady at the store told me, you know, usually this is not your usual sauerkraut that you buy at the grocery store. You're gonna need to rinse it before you use it. So I don't know what this tastes like, but you know, as far as I know, I like the fermented funky taste. So I don't know if I'm gonna rinse it. So I'm gonna taste it right now, and we'll see. I don't know. I'm like hesitant the fact that I'm gonna have to rinse it. Like, is it that funky or like that sour that I'm gonna have to rinse it? It's delicious. I'm not gonna rinse this. I'm gonna keep the brine too, because I have a few ideas on how to go about this. But basically, you're gonna use the brine to your advantage. So in this case, you know, I'm just draining it briefly, but it's not gonna. I'm not gonna rinse it or anything. I actually like the sour kind of funk to it, and well, it's not too. It doesn't taste like farts. Sometimes you can kind of taste a little bit farty. And to that, I'm gonna add my own sauerkraut, but I have to go get it. Oh, I forgot. I bought a leek. I should put a little bit of leek in there. Yeah, I have my own sauerkraut that I make. This is a pretty old batch. It's gotten a bit dark brown, but it's because of the... Not dark brown, but it's gotten a bit brown instead of being like bright yellow. It's because of the aromatics that I put, and also the fact that it's old. Like, it's a bit more than 1 year old. It's like maybe... Actually, no, it's probably like 2 years old. I'm just going to cut a little bit of leek and add it to my sweating onions. Always clean your leeks if they're dirty. So I'm checking it out right now, and you can see it's clean, but always make sure when you're cooking with leeks, because I always say it in all my videos, but when you know, leeks grow upwards, so they trap sand sometimes, but these are very clean, so I'm gonna just cook here. The leeks are gonna bring a little bit more of a vegetally taste and a little bit more of like a different sweetness. I think it's going to be interesting. I've never used leeks in a Choucroute Garnie, but you know, leeks are something that make me think of home, so I'm going to add a bit of leeks. And the smell of the leeks with the smoked pork jowl and onion smell is it's to die for. So I got my sauerkraut here. I'm going to add a bit of the rest in here. So I'm going to add a little bit of sauerkraut that's rinsed, I guess, just because I have to empty the pot. But this is not a lot, you know. Choucroute Garnie, you want quite a bit of sauerkraut, so I'm going to gonna add a lot of my own sauerkraut. Or at least that's the plan. Now I'm sorry, you know, it looks boring. You're just looking at sauerkraut, but I swear it's gonna be interesting. So how does this smell? Oh. You can see my mustache sniffing it, but it smells really good. It smells a lot more funky than the sauerkraut that I bought. But you know, that's the point. That's why I ferment my own. I have my own personal preferences, and it's what I like. And the other thing about this is like sauerkraut, when you buy it, like the commercial sauerkraut, even though this is like home style, whatever they call it, sauerkraut it's very fine and it's kind of soft. This is not as soft. It's not as soft or as fine as like the really commercial sauerkraut that I find. But you know, this is plain fermented. You know, salt, water, and cabbage. Maybe not even water. Probably salt and cabbage sauerkraut. So it's legit. But then if you compare it to mine, texture-wise, mine is a lot more large chunks, as you can see, and therefore it's going to be a lot crunchier in the mouth. You feel it more. So mine is also a lot more sour and tastes almost like a pickled cabbage instead of a fermented cabbage, because it's been going on for so long. But mine also has a bunch of aromatics. You know, it has mustard seeds, it has caraway seeds, it has juniper berries in it. So I'm going to put a bit less of that in my Choucroute Garnie because my sauerkraut is already seasoned to some degree with those aromatics. But it's all up to your tastes, you know. All right. So we have our sauerkraut. We have our meats, and we have our sweating onions. So what's next for our onions? Well, we're gonna add our aromatics. So I'm gonna crush some garlic and throw it in there. You don't have to put too much. You know, this is not an Italian American dish. This is not a Southern French dish. You know, the garlic is just there to kind of bring it up a little bit, but the garlic is not meant to be like a predominant flavor. You know, this is a lot of sweetness, a lot of cabbage, a lot of more, you know, northern flavors, and you know, you're not going to imagine a lot of garlic in like a northern dish. So we have our garlic, we have our onions. Next up, we're going to add some bay leaves. I have only dry ones because, once again, you know, you're not going to have fresh bay leaves at this time of year, you know, when you live in a cold weather climate. So I'm going to add 3 bay leaves. I like the taste of bay leaves. We're going to add some beautiful little caraway seeds. Smells a bit minty, smells a bit licoricey. You know, I like to add a good amount because I really love the flavor. But what I like even more, this is something that, you know, some people love it, some people hate it. I personally really dig this ingredient. It's juniper berries. I'm pretty sure I have a lot. I just don't know where it is. So I'm gonna open my little baggie of juniper berries instead. Oh no, I found them. Juniper berries are berries of I believe it's a type of like pine tree related thing. But they smell really piney, and they actually look like berries. I mean, they are berries. They're just like dried, and they're really delicious. But the flavor goes a long way, so I'm not gonna put too much. It's kind of like piney and a little bit citrusy, a little bit herbaceous. If you drink gin or you're aware of gin, juniper berries are the predominant flavor in gin. So, well, at least in like London dry gins and you know, like I guess Nordic style gins, you'll taste the juniper berries quite a lot. And I'm gonna add some cloves. I just need to find them. Oh yeah, there we go. So some people put coriander seeds. I'm not a fan of coriander seeds in my dressed sauerkraut, but I am a fan of cloves. Now you don't want to put too much because cloves are a really, really overwhelming flavor, and at least where I come from, a lot of ham is flavored with cloves, and since I'm going to add a ham later, I don't want the cloves to be too strong. So I'm going to add a few cloves, just like a few here and there like that. The thing with cloves too is what the French usually do, I see that a lot in French videos, is they'll take their cloves and they'll basically spike them into their onion, like they're decorating their onion, and then they're gonna leave like a whole onion in there that's gonna stew with the rest, and that onion's gonna add sweetness, and that onion's gonna add the clove flavor, and then they remove the onion at the end, if I'm not mistaken. That way the cloves don't overstay their welcome. Now this is starting to steam a lot less, which means I'm at risk of browning. Now I say at risk, but like, it's not like browning is a significant problem or anything. It's just that I personally don't want this to brown too much. Now next step is going to be to add our wine. Now I'm adding just like a random white wine that I have. This is a Pinot Grigio that I bought at the grocery store for cooking purposes. It kind of turns out semi alright for me because when you make Choucroute Garnie, the wine you're probably going to want to use is a Pinot Gris from like the Alsace region, or a Riesling, which I also believe is from the Alsace region. So the fact that this is a Pinot Grigio, and as far as I know, Pinot Grigio is just a similar style as Pinot Gris, except it's Italian instead of being French. At least, you know, etymologically speaking, the names are really similar, so I would assume that they're supposed to be similar. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know anything about wine. I barely drink alcohol. I only drink sometimes. Now we're going to add a little bit of sauerkraut brine to this. And we're going to add a little bit of sauerkraut to this. But the thing is, I don't want my sauerkraut to lose all of its texture. So I'm only going to add like half my sauerkraut, because otherwise it'll be too soft by the end. And I might add more sauerkraut afterwards, because I like a lot of sauerkraut in my Choucroute Garnie. So we're going to add it like this. Oh yeah, it's already starting to look like a proper choucroute. Now, there still needs to be a lot more choucroute in here, but you know, this is already looking at smelling great. Maybe the wine's a little bit fruitier than I would have expected, but I don't think that's gonna hurt me too much. I might add a little bit more liquid, but we'll see. First things first is I'm gonna add my beautiful pork shoulder, and we're gonna get it submerged. And we're gonna add the tougher pieces of meat. So what are the tougher pieces of meat? Well, the ham is pretty tough. So we're gonna add some ham in there. Oh, it's not crazy hard. So what we're gonna do is I'm only gonna put half the ham. I'm gonna put half the ham. And I'm gonna put half the kielbasa. It's gonna season everything. So at this stage, you know, you have many choices on how you want to proceed with your Choucroute Garnie. You can let it simmer, you can put it in the oven and let it gently cook like that. That's probably what I'm gonna do. I like cooking stuff, it long cooks in the oven, so that's probably what I'm gonna do. Something else I'm gonna do is, so I might add more brine later, but for now I want a little bit more liquid. So I might add a little bit of a broth. So my broth is still a bit frozen because I took it out yesterday, so I guess didn't have time to defrost too much. But it's not a big deal. Now, the thing about broth is. Usually, you know, you want to add like a light broth, you know, or water. Since I had broth, I'll use broth, but like you want to use not too strong of a broth, you know, like if it's a nice roasty broth, like keep it for something else. Don't use it on this. This you want like a light broth. You want like, you don't want it, the broth to overpower the wine and the sauerkraut. So we're gonna keep it like this for now. Alright, so it started boiling and I ended up finding some thyme, so I'm gonna add some thyme because I like thyme in my choucroute garnie. So I'm just gonna put a lid on this and I'm gonna put it in a low oven. My oven is currently at 275. I just want a really gentle, you know, a really gentle oven. And we're gonna let it simmer for, you know, maybe an hour and a half. And after that time, I'll add my salt pork. And I'll decide how I want to proceed with the other meats. But for now, that's about it. Alright, so we just have a little thing to do before we continue. But my salt pork's been simmering for like about an hour or so. So I'm going to incorporate it now into my choucroute garnie. And I'm going to keep the juice actually. I'm going to keep the juice. And I'm going to add some, how do you call it? I'm going to add some sauerkraut juice to it. So right now the water is very salty. By adding, because of salt pork, and it tastes kind of porky and complex and delicious. And what's gonna happen is by mixing it with the sauerkraut juice, and by and the fact that it's already, like, you know, quite salty, is that when I boil my potatoes in it, they'll become very flavorful. So I'm just gonna get a little bit of that sauerkraut juice in there. So I've never seen people boil their potatoes in sauerkraut juice, but it's something I heard about. And I'm going to dilute it a little bit because it's still very, very salty. Something I've heard about where I was watching, you know, because every time I want to learn something new, I want to develop something new that I've never done before. I want to improve my recipes. So I was looking up how other people do choucroute garnie, and delicious. And one thing that I saw was people who boil the potatoes separately from the choucroute garnie in brine. So I'm gonna try that out. You know, I'm just gonna add like these little beautiful little fingerling potatoes. Oftentimes I see people take big potatoes and they cut them into chunks and put them in there, but and they peel them, but I'm not gonna peel them. I like unpeeled potatoes, and I'm gonna put them in my brine over here. And we're basically just gonna eat simple boiled potatoes. You know, nothing crazy. Just make sure they're clean. I know these ones are clean, but just in case, I'll check them out a little bit. And you want to get like boiling potatoes. You want potatoes that are gonna be able to survive at long wet heat. And you know, when I was younger and I did choucroute garnie, you know, I would basically boil my potatoes separately and eat them with the choucroute garnie on the side. But now what I do is I boil them in the choucroute garnie, but now I'm gonna try a different technique where I boil them in here. So you want to bring the potatoes slowly to a boil. Like I always say, I think I've said it multiple times in my videos. but you want to bring your potatoes to a boil from room temp or cold water. That way the potatoes get time to evenly heat up. And this is just gonna go back in the oven. Alright, we're in the last stretch, so to speak. Oh yeah, man. Look at that. Look at that. It's beautiful. Let's get a bit more light in here. Yeah. Let's zoom in a bit. Oh, the dramatic zoom. My battery's about to die, so we'll do this quick. It's pretty simple though. We're gonna nestle everything in here. The rest of the sausages, the kielbasa. We just kind of want to layer it, and then we're gonna kind of play around a little bit. The ham, kielbasa, sausage, smoked pork jowl. Really, you want a little bit of everything. Ouch! I forgot that this was hot for a second there. I'm just gonna make sure everything's submerged in the juice. We're gonna add the rest, or a sauerkraut, just to cover. Isn't that a beautiful sight? Then we're just gonna give it a sprinkle of salt. You don't want to put too much salt because the sauerkraut is salted and all the meats are salted. And then you just close the lid and put it back in the oven until it's almost ready, and then you just finish it with the potatoes in for a good like 20 to 30 minutes and you're good. Let's go. So dramatic. So we're starting to run out of space, but it should be fine. I'm just gonna drop my potatoes in there because otherwise this is pretty much ready. So I'm just gonna reheat the potatoes in there. I'm gonna leave them whole. I like big chunks of potatoes. We'll see if it's gonna overflow. I hope not. The only sign you're really looking for at this point is to make sure that you want to make sure that your pork shoulder or any kind of like pork that needs a long cook time to get tender, you just want that to be tender. So at this point the pork is tender, or just about to be. So you know that you're as soon as the potatoes are going to be ready and fully cooked and tender and warm, that everything else is going to be ready as well. I'm almost going to spill, but it should be fine. I'm using a Dutch oven. You know, I like to use my Dutch oven, but you could use a big pot, which is what I was considering because I knew this would happen and that I might overfill. But you know, it's pretty tight. All right. Oh yeah. Isn't this a beautiful sight? Potatoes, sausages, meats, a delicious broth, sauerkraut. Oh yeah, man. So it's done now. It's been simmering for I don't know how long. I actually didn't time it. I just kind of went by feel. But basically all the meats are ready. The tough meats are tender, and everything else has rendered its fat and given its flavor. And nothing is too mushy. Everything is nice. Some people prefer it less brothy. I like it this way. It's like a mix between sauerkraut soup and choucroute garnie. So what do you do now? Well, you basically separate out this, not separate out the stuff, but like basically you serve it in a plate, and you take the meats that you want and you cut them up into manageable pieces, and you eat it that way with mustard on the side and pickles on the side. I'm not gonna do that right now because I like to eat it. How do you say? The next day, or like after it's cooled down completely and reheated, because all the flavors mingle together and it gets even better. So if you have patience and you have time, you know, eat it the next day, eat it later, and if you don't, you can eat it now and it'll be delicious, I guarantee it. You know, with beer on the side, or wine on the side, anything on the side really, but all I'll have to say is that a must really is having mustard on the side. And other than that, you just gotta pick and choose what you want to eat. It's an absolute feast, and when it's brothy like this, you can put it in containers and it freezes really well because the broth kind of insulates everything and keeps everything kind of intact. The only thing is the texture of the potatoes and the sauerkraut might suffer a little bit, but other than that, it keeps really well if you freeze it. So thanks for letting me share this recipe with you, and I hope you try it if at some point. Alright, so the part of the video where I you know, that classic part that I've been doing now, where we talk about the dish after having done it. I wanted to talk a little bit about this dish because to me it's something that over time I developed a lot of love for. When I was younger, I didn't like this very much. Every time my dad made it, you know, I thought, it smells really bad, and you know, he would ferment his sauerkraut in advance to make this. Like, my dad doesn't really eat sauerkraut that much, but like for this, you know, he would ferment his own sauerkraut just to make the choucroute garnie. And you know, I always thought like, man, this smells terrible, and the dish as it simmers smells terrible, and I'm not a big fan of this, and I never wanted to try it. And then over time, as I got older, I kind of developed a love of fermented foods, and I tried to get back into eating more, you know, European food and like historical Quebec food and stuff like that. Kind of paying my respects to where my culture came from. And I started doing it, you know, one day I was just like, you know, I've never had choucroute garnie. It always smelled terrible to me, but in theory, I like everything involved. You know, I like fermented cabbage, I like sausages, I like cured meats, I like smoked meats, I like things like that. So I gave it a shot, and I've been doing my own sauerkraut for maybe 6 years now, and I've been doing choucroute garnie for like 3 or 4 years now, and it's a dish that I really, really love. It's something I look forward to every year. I look forward to making my choucroute garnie. You know, I look forward to autumn when the cabbage is growing well and at its peak and it has a lot of sweetness. And the harvest season, I'm looking forward to starting that, you know, that batch of fermented cabbage in early autumn, and then letting it ferment until, you know, winter, and then making my sauerkraut for winter. And it just feels so good and so satisfying once, you know, you get to take that first bite with the potatoes and the pork and the cabbage and the little broth and it's just something that I think, even though it's from France and from Germany, it conveys itself really well to using Quebec ingredients and things like that. You know, in Quebec, because of the French influence, we have a lot of, how do you say, like, we have a lot of pork products and like things that maybe in the rest of the world people won't necessarily find. You know, we have salt pork, we have like every single piece of pork you can imagine. The cured version, the salted version, the smoked version, and the fresh version, you know, so it's perfect for something like this. And because of a pretty big Polish and German influence too, we have a lot of sausages and things like that. So this is, and a lot of, if you want to buy your own sauerkraut, you know, there's a lot of sauerkraut. And in general too, you know, the winters here are so cold and so harsh, like eating something like this, it just feels logical, you know. It's a dish that I didn't have enough respect for, that now I have a lot of respect for. And that's why I'm glad I got to show it today. You know, it's comfort food. It makes me think of my dad. It makes me think of my country. Sort of. Quebec's not a country, but it makes me think of Quebec. I don't know why I said country, but it makes me think of a lot of things. You know, I think it's even though I don't feel any sort of national attachment to where I come from. Really, there's something about eating food that makes sense to eat where you're from, and you just really feel it when you eat it. Like, yeah, I was born to eat this kind of situation. Also, my hair's like untying and stuff. But yeah, it's like I was made to eat this. This food was made. Like, there's a reason people ate it back then, and there's a reason why eating it now still feels so satisfying. It's because it just fits. Like, I wouldn't eat this in summer. I wouldn't eat this with different meats. I wouldn't eat this with like a different fermented vegetable. It just makes sense as it is. It's just a hearty, delicious feast of meat and cabbage. It's just wonderful. Almost it's a dish I'm nostalgic for, even though I don't have childhood memories of eating it, if that makes any sense. It's like nostalgic to your soul in some way. So anyways, thanks for watching. It means a lot. And I know the camera's skewed right now. I'm using kind of books as a tripod, but the books are kind of tilted, so it looks like we have a creepy, oh, this is like a horror movie and they're interviewing the killer moment, and the camera's all skewed. But I'm not known for high production value. I don't really care. I just care about what I'm showing you and what I'm telling you, and as long as it's clear and as long as it's authentic, I think it's fine. It doesn't need to be clear and crisp and professional production value with a $60 million budget per cooking episode. But yeah, try out Choucroute Garnie. The most daunting part is just buying all the meats and fermenting your own cabbage. But once everything's like there, actually cooking it is a joke. You just put everything into a pot together and you cook them together. And if you're really like kind of anal about things, you can put things at different moments so they're at their peak when the dish is ready. But you don't even really need to. Yeah, thank you.